Halo, halo. Halo, halo. Halo, halo. Halo, halo. Halo, halo. Halo, halo.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, hi there.
Hello.
Okay, I was checking if the presenters are already there, so I can see you. Happy to see you.
Happy to see you too.
Are you okay to be the third as planned?
Sure, that's great.
Okay, right, because there's a small change, I think, in the participants or presenters. The second one is going to be swapped with someone else, but I hope it's not a problem with you.
No, that's no problem.
Good. Okay, right. So we still have like 8 minutes, so I'm muting myself, waiting
All
for
right.
waiting for others because I can't see the others. That's the problem, I think.
All right.
I can. All right, we'll see. All right, see you in a few.
Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry. Hello. Gosia, are you still there? Gosia?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so you're going to be second, if that's okay, all right?
Okay, yes.
You're really going to replace the girls that are not here today, all right?
Okay.
All right. No technical problems?
I don't think so.
Okay, good. Hello, everyone. Just a second. I'm not sure if we can start, or shall we wait for Dr. Chris Brighton or someone from ECU to officially start?
Good morning, Teresa. You can
Hello.
start whenever
Hi
you're
there.
ready.
I
I'd like to remind the people who are in the audience to keep the volume of the microphone muted unless they are presenting. This is the 7th of our 8 sessions. So this is the last day of the conference today. And I'm looking forward to hearing about the topics in the presentation this morning on global culture. So Teresa, please start.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so yes, today global culture, this is what we are going to, well, hear about and hopefully talk about a bit. And we have 3 presenters today, and from what I understand, all 3 are here. I've already sort of had short chats with all of them here, and we are going to have 15 minutes per person, and per person. And we're not going to have any questions at the end of each presentation, but the question and answer session, let's say, is going to take place at the very end. Okay, so if you don't mind, we can wait until the end and then ask if you have any questions that you would like to ask and you want to express them immediately, you can write them in the chat. Okay, and then we're going to come back to them at the end of the session. And our first presenter is Jin Liu. I hope I didn't mispronounce it too badly. Okay, so she's going to talk about Chinese food culture, intercultural communication, the American Chinese restaurant as an example. Okay, so the floor is yours. I hope, please everyone mute your microphones, okay? If that's all right. So, here we go.
Okay, now I will start. Wait a minute, I will share my monitor.
Right.
Can you see the slides?
Yeah, we can see something.
Can you see my slides? Oh, now can you see the slides?
Now we can, yes, now it's fine.
Okay, now I will start. Okay, hello everyone. I'm Liu Yujing from Shanxi Normal University. Today I want to talk about the Chinese food culture and intercultural communication. And now I will take the American Chinese restaurant as an example. So this is my presentation contents about the challenge, the reason and the suggestion. So first, I want to talk about the challenge faced by American Chinese restaurants. In American TV series, you can always see the Chinese food or Chinese restaurant. For example, look at the picture, the left one. In the TV series Friends, Chandler's mother said that she likes to eat Kung Pao chicken. And this is Big Bang Theory. You can find that they are eating Chinese food, and you can find some Chinese characters like Qian Yu Bing, that means fortune cookie. So it is only a TV clip. It reflects the reality that Chinese food has penetrated into the American's life. According to the media reports, there are more than 15,000 Chinese restaurants in America. And although the number of the Chinese restaurants is increasing, they still face many problems. First, the food they provide is not authentic Chinese food, but the American Chinese food. For example, the General Tso's chicken, chop suey, and fortune cookie. This food, Chinese do not even know this food. And second, some American customers think that Chinese restaurants are not clean, and the food they provide is very, very low. The quality of them is very low. So, and in the past, they even thought that Chinese ate mice. That's really bad. So if they want to change the attitude of the American customers to the Chinese food or Chinese restaurants, they need to provide authentic Chinese food, and they need to maintain the Chinese characteristics. So now I want to talk about the reason why I stress the importance of maintaining the Chinese characteristics. For example, first, the Chinese food is more than just food. I think it is more than just food. It also carries Chinese culture and has a certain cultural connotation. For example, dumplings with different fillings and shapes have different meanings. Like cabbage dumplings mean to make money, and the fish dumplings mean a surplus. If the stuffing of the dumplings is changed to a cream or a filling filled in apple pie, the dumplings also lose its cultural connotation. And that's why they need to provide authentic Chinese cuisine. Second, American Chinese restaurants have multiple functions. For Chinese immigrants, people can gain the sense of belonging and easier homesickness by going to Chinese restaurants, because both Chinese food and the decoration in the store will create a hometown atmosphere. When you enter the restaurant, you will feel warm and familiar. For American customers, the Chinese restaurant is a place to experience exotic culture. Therefore, only by maintaining Chinese characteristics can these two functions be better run. So how to enhance the competitiveness of Chinese restaurants? I have 4 suggestions. So first is maintain the characteristics of Chinese cuisine, especially in appearance and taste. We need to show American customers the difference between Chinese food and other national food. Second, they need to have an international strategic goal. They need to learn from some international brands, such as McDonald's and Starbucks. In order to expand the market, Chinese restaurants must strengthen their own management and need to improve the quality of dishes and improve the quality of service personnel. Third, nowadays, consumers pay more attention to green and healthy diets. There are even many vegetarians in the United States. So Chinese restaurants should follow this trend to launch healthy recipes and develop Chinese dishes with low calorie, low fat, low cholesterol, low sugar, and low salt. Last but not least, I think they should strengthen the creation of the restaurant culture atmosphere. For example, launch some cultural events based on traditional Chinese festival. They can invite customers to make moon cakes by themselves at the Mid-Autumn Festival, with the spread of Chinese culture around the world. Traditional Chinese opera dramas and comic dialogues have gradually become known to foreigners. For example, the Deyun. Here, look at picture. For example, the Deyun, a famous professional comic dialogue club in China, has performed concerts in New Zealand. So, American Chinese rounds can launch some comic dialogues or the Chinese traditional opera to attract more customers. And above all, I want to say, if the American Chinese restaurant want to attract more customers, they need to provide authentic Chinese food, and they need to maintain the Chinese characteristics. So that's all. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. Thanks. I'm sure people will have some questions. If they do, they can ask them at the end. Okay. I hope you're staying with us till the end. And our next presenter is Małgorzata Opałka from Krosno State College from Poland. And Małgorzata is going to talk about the linguistic picture of Singielka in Polish, building its cognitive definition. All right, yes. Małgorzata, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, all right. So the floor
I will share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I will start. Okay, one of the ethnolinguistics deals with there is very popular right now ethnolinguistic school that it's called Ethnolinguistic School of Dublin, with that deals with the notion of ethnolinguistic worldview, how we see and how we define world and words, and they introduced something, the new way of creating definitions. They postulate that their interpretation of our reality is not solely based on facts. It has a cultural content, and it is mostly based on our beliefs, on our view. And I did a study on a Polish word, Singielka, which is a relatively new word, and I wanted to see what were the cultural components, why the word was even borrowed, because it was borrowed from the English language. And to do that, I used the methodology used for creating cognitive definition. And cognitive definition, in creating that, you use all the available data, like etymology of the word, definition found in the dictionaries. You also read a lot of text of cultures, like blog articles and books, and you try to define what people as a group thing of a word, what more it is than just the dictionary definition that you can find in the beginning. And I also did a survey within the group of 229 women about the word. That's why I also decided to do just a selection of texts and pick just female respondents to make the data more make data easier to analyze, but also to make the answers more reliable in that group. So that's why I divided my research first in the books, articles, and media coverage of the word, and then the second one was the analysis of the survey I had done. In the etymology of the word, it is obvious that it comes from the English word single, but unlike in the English version of the word, which can define anything that is single, in the Polish borrowing, it only applies to people, generally women. There is also worth to point out that the first word that was borrowed was singiel, which was the male form, and currently the gender version is being used. What is the reason of borrowing that word is the basic features. So, being single, as in unmarried and without a partner. And I've also tried to compare it to the words that were used in the past and are still used currently, which are panna and stara panna, maiden and old maiden, that are to a degree synonyms. So I also wondered what was the need for another word. The analyzed text of cultures, especially media, the one in media like blogs and articles, portray very positive, in general, very positive view of a woman. So that seems to be the cultural change, that the main goal for a woman is not only to get married while she's young, but she can also be independent and be happy and have a career. What was distinctive was that in books, the woman could be happy while being single, but she was still looking and ending up married. That was like she was not just happy in the end without a partner. And also there were some views that she can be unhappy because she is alone. So, which was kind of similar to the stara panna notion. The most interesting part was the questionnaire, which consisted of 4 questions about the age of Singielka, about the word, is it viewed as positive or negative or neutral, and about description, when I left the question open for the people to decide to write whatever they thought was correct. As we can see on the slide, there were few aspects that was mentioned the most often. like a woman who is alone and enjoys life, somewhat liberated, independent, single by choice. And those were the most common answers I found. General findings of the study showed the change in the perception of a single woman in general, no matter the name, because the panna and stara panna were mostly young women or women or the word had negative connotation, while now it's moving towards neutral. So the word doesn't have it's not a bad thing to be a Singielka. And also for now the definition is based solely as unmarried woman that's independent, but the rest of the adjectives and connotations within the word are slightly vary. I think it's also because the word is just starting to have a clear definition behind it. So the cognitive definition that I've tried to build turned out to be quite simple. Obviously, it's not a full definition because there are many aspects that I didn't consider or didn't, for example, men point of view of the word. But in general, I think the word shows a cultural change in Poland, and it also would be very informative to know that we are borrowing new words because we have new concepts of what the life is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure, again, questions will follow later on. And if you have any questions at the moment, you can ask them, and Małgosia, you can answer them in the chat room, because I can see a discussion or some conversation is going on there at the moment about Chinese restaurants. So if you want to have a look at that too, yes, I'm sure some more questions will just appear there about Singielka. Okay, and the last presentation for now that is going to be from ECU, from what I understand, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. Oh, you're already there. All right. So just a second, my computer is freezing. Okay, Robin Carter, I can't at the moment read the topic of your presentation, but can you tell us yourself, okay, what the presentation is going to be about, would you?
Sure, it's on reclaiming the commons in art, so radical aesthetics for the people and what that would look like.
All right, thank you for doing that, and okay, please start.
All right, so can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right, great. So as I said, my presentation will be about reclaiming the commons in art. And I just wanted to say really quick, I did a study abroad in Krosno over the summer at the Glass Center, and it's great to see some people from Krosno. So hello, dzień dobry. So as I said, so radical aesthetics for the people, and what would that look like? So first I'd like to start with a question, what makes art significant? So as Drake points out over here, that it's the cultural aspirations of the participants involved that determine which artworks and artists are significant. Dominant Western art historical narratives will tell you that the intentionality of the artist, or the immediacy of the art object, or the autonomous nature of either of these are actually what makes it significant. But I find that these to be less productive points of concern. So who are the participants involved, and what are their cultural aspirations? Through my research, I've found that the dominant ruling classes have decided the significance in art. And their interests lie in maintaining power and reproducing the conditions that enable their concentrated political and economic wealth. And in the art world, that turns out to be cultural capital. So if we look at Karl Marx's historical materialism and his trajectory of history, we'll see that there are many social formations over time. And within the means of production, there arises conflict, and this gives rise to an emerging class. So if we look at a feudal society, we could see that the aristocracy placed value on art that represented God's presence. As you can see in Giorgio Vasari's painting of the Annunciation, the dove and the radiating rays are said to represent God's presence or God's order. And just as the aristocracy claimed that their governing was justified by God's order, their artistic aesthetic concerns were as well said to represent God's order. So this tie between the artistic and political forms of representation carried on into capitalist society. So if we look at a famous painting from the Enlightenment, Ming's Parnassus, we can see that nature's order is said to be represented, and this is what makes Ming's painting significant. This painting is pretty much the beginning of what turns out to be modern art and the beginning of the style of neoclassicism, which is, of course, said to reproduce nature's presence. As we look towards modern art, for example, Kandinsky's Composition 8 here, we can see that the tendency was now to represent medium specificity. So in Kandinsky's case, this meant reproducing the flatness of the canvas. If you look at Kandinsky's manifesto, you can see that he actually reaches back to God's order, nature's order, and medium specificity, and he has allusions to all three throughout Über das Geistige in der Kunst, or on the spiritual and art. So what does all this mean? These aesthetic criteria reflect a tendency towards an ideological representation of truth. And when I say ideological, I mean culture masquerading as nature. So norms, values, beliefs held as if they were naturally so. So whether purely religious, secularized, or situated within materiality, this representation of truth serves a dual purpose. It's to veil social distinctions and perpetuate the conditions of dominance. So looking back to Marx's dialectical historical materialism, we'll see that the emerging class that comes out of the capitalist governing system, as his focus was, is the proletariat, so the working class. So my question is, when the proletarians become the dominant class, what criteria will be used to determine significant art? And what I've come up with is a tripartite criticality. So if the artworks or artists are able to provide a means to provide a critical lens from which to view society, so to scrutinize social formation and innovate society for a better tomorrow. A collective aspect, so refusing the bourgeois Enlightenment individual possessive form of the artist as entrepreneur in favor of a more collective starting point, and as well as the reproducibility. So for these artworks and artists to be able to provide working templates that can be replicated in the future in scrutinized society. So this need for a proletarian aesthetics isn't something new. With the Russian revolutions, there was artists, theorists, and philosophers and actors that came up with this group, this collective called the Prolet Cult, which is a portmanteau of proletarian culture. And this group performed do-it-yourself theater groups, and they refused to have big star actors. This was really an effort to have artwork by the working class and for the working class. Art historian Claire Bishop, in her book Artificial Hells, wanted to ask what the purpose was, and she asked, would it be to reduce the aristocracy's grip on culture? Would it be to promote cultural production by the working class, to reflect social reality, or to produce it? And I'd like to argue that it was all of those things. This group, the Prolet Cult, was actually shut down by Lenin because he found that funds would be better used to educate the working class instead of be spent on what he deemed frivolous artistic activities. So a contemporary version of the proto cult that I've found is this collective called Decolonize This Place. So this image here that we're looking at is, it's at the Whitney Museum. They're occupying this space because on the board of this museum and many other art museums in the United States, there seat boards of just CEOs, so just corporate elitist capitalists. And one of those CEOs is Warren B. Kanders. He's actually the vice chair of the board of the Whitney Museum, and he's the CEO of Safariland. So Safariland produces weapons and equipment for law enforcement agencies. And just recently, I'm sure you've heard about the migrant caravan headed to the United States. Well, on Christmas Day last year, there was tear gas deployed on women and children, and it was found that those tear gas canisters were produced by Safariland. So there's a direct connection between that violence and the Whitney Museum. And if you know anything about Althusserian Marxism, you'll find that there are two state apparatuses that reproduce the conditions to govern a society. And those two apparatuses are an ideological state apparatus and a repressive one. So Kanders kind of has a foot in both of those camps. He's ideologically and repressively reproducing his means of controlling. And that comes together in his dismissal of the Decolonize This Place with this quote I have. While my company and the museum have distinct missions, both are important contributors to society. This is why I believe that the politicization of every aspect of public life, including commercial organizations and cultural institutions, is not productive nor healthy. He obviously did not like what Decolonize This Place is doing. So another similar activity is performed by this group called PAIN, which is an acronym for Prescription Addiction Intervention Now. This artist collective was formed by photographer Nan Golden, and their purpose is to go after the producers of OxyContin. And the producers of OxyContin happen to be this family called the Sacklers. Notably, Richard Sackler was the head of this. And like Warren Kanders in the previous slide, he has contributed large sums of money to art museums, which of course has political persuasion on what is shown at galleries. So if you're not familiar with the Guggenheim, there's a spiral staircase that goes up the museum, and that's what you can see these people standing on. So Richard Sackler famously said upon the creation of a new form of OxyContin that the launch of OxyContin tablets will be followed by a blizzard of prescriptions that will bury the competition. The prescription of the blizzard will be so deep, dense, and white. So these artists have come together and actually are performing that quote inside of the Guggenheim Museum. And just currently, there are hundreds of countries and companies that are suing the Sacklers for their contributions to the opioid epidemic in the United States and worldwide. So another example of proletarian aesthetics in art would be the artist couple Jennifer Ayora and Guillermo Calzadilla. So this project they have called Chalk includes going to different places and introducing life-size pieces of chalk that you would find like school teachers use, but this is like 6 feet tall. They place these in public places and allow passersby to break them apart and write messages of their own. So most notably, this happened in 2002 in Lima, Peru. There was massive gentrification going on. Rents were rising, poor people were being forced to move out of their homes, and the government was failing to address these concerns. So Ayora and Calzadilla dropped these pieces of chalk off in the main government square. And of course, citizens walking by broke up the chalk and wrote very disparaging messages towards the government, cries for help, cries to be represented by their representatives. And the government officials quickly confiscated the chalk and washed away the messages. And when they did that, that repressive action actually brought way more attention to the problems in Lima. And in my opinion, made the artwork and the artistic process even more productive. So a similar artistic activity that took place was performed by Tanya Bruguera, who's a Cuban artist. This activity took place at the Havana Biennial. And this was around the time when Raul Castro took over the reins from his brother Fidel, and he promised the Cuban people that he would lead a more democratic government. So Tania Bruguera, being a Cuban citizen and an artist, took that to heart and called its bluff. So at the Havana Biennial, she opened up this podium, this floor, to Cuban citizens, asking them to come on stage for 1 minute and speak their mind uncensored. So there was 2 Cuban guards who were actually actors paid to be there, and a live dove that would be placed on the participant's shoulder to pay homage to the famous speech with Fidel Castro speaking at the podium with the dove. So obviously there was dozens and hundreds of these participants that came up and spoke their minds. And when it was all said and done, the Cuban government and the Havana Biennial came out and condemned these actions as a ploy to strike a blow at the Cuban Revolution. So I'm not actually an art historian. These are all artistic processes that influence my personal work. So I'd like to show you some of that. I've developed this project called Stand-In, and our purpose is to provide what I call surrogate spokespeople for political figures. So if you're not familiar, this woman who's represented here is Betsy DeVos, and she's the Secretary of Education in Trump's cabinet in the United States. So she is in charge of all education in our country. She's done pretty horrific things towards women, especially the LGBTQ community, disabled students, sexual assault victims. The list goes on and on. What my plan is to get the voices of her constituencies heard. So in January, I took this project to Washington, D.C. during the Women's March protest. And I brought hundreds of report cards for participants to fill out to grade Betsy DeVos on her actions thus far. And those report cards are sent to her office so that the constituents can actually get their voices heard. So the working class can actually become participants in my artistic process. And what inspired me to pick Betsy DeVos was this, not only her governing style and her policies, but her massive contributions to the Republican Party in the United States. Her family is the largest contributor to the Republican Party. And this quote she said pretty much sums up her, what I call pay-to-play politics. So she said, "I've decided to stop taking offense at the suggestion that we are buying influence. Now I simply concede the point. They are right. We do expect something in return. We expect to foster a conservative governing philosophy consistent of limited government and respect for our traditional American virtues." So as I said before, this took place in DC. Here's another image from it. And if you'd like to see this project or other future projects, you can visit me on Instagram at standin.official or my website, standin.net. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you too. Again, very interesting. Again, I'm sure questions will follow. If I may start with the first one, like, why did you choose this particular topic?
So do you mean for the artistic practice at the end, or the particular topic of the whole presentation?
For the presentation, yes.
The presentation, because I've been studying Marxist theory and art history, and I've come to the conclusion that significance over time has been determined by ruling classes, and I think it's about time that the working class has their interests represented instead of our political leaders.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Anyone? Let's check the chat room. Yes. Can you see the first question to you? Robin, can you see the first question? Yeah.
I'm looking for it.
Sure. Yeah, there are two questions already. How many people participated in grading in this?
Okay, sorry, now I can see.
All right, yeah, so the first question from Małgorzata.
So I had over 200 participants, and they filled out report cards, and then I digitized them before sending them to the Department of Education. So I have digital versions of the report cards, but there was about 230 at the March that I got.
Okay, the second question from Chris, also for you. Do you feel that public protests will make a difference? We see protests in France, the UK, etc., but also see political leaders refusing to listen.
Yes, that's a great question. So I do see that they're refusing to listen, but I've also seen cases where it works. I don't know if you were following the big corporation Amazon's mission to get a second headquarters in the United States. Just to recap, New York City was one of their locations that they're going to open up a second headquarters. And there was about 6 big artist collectives and activists that came together and performed massive protests in the streets. And Amazon decided to not place their headquarters in New York. And if you looked at the news in America at the time, the leftist media and the right-wing media also said that this was a loss for New York, but when really it was actually a win for the working class citizens. So there are victories. You just have to look at who's winning the victories. Is it the political leaders or the working class?
When you were talking to people or when you were following some stories, have you ever come across situations when people, protesters or people generally, when asked to sign something to protest, they backed off when they found out they had to sign it actually with their names, just simply being afraid of consequences?
Yeah, so I actually anticipated that, and I included an optional contact information on the bottom, so you didn't have to fill out your name and stuff like that. But surprisingly, a lot of the people I talked to were teachers and students, and they were more than happy to have their name attached to something that would be protesting Betsy DeVos.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. Any more questions? Anyone? Well, I guess not. Okay, so let's go back to the previous presenters. Thank you very much, Robin.
Thank you.
Okay, questions for the other 2 presenters. Okay, let's go to the beginning. Eugene, have you been reading the questions? And I can see you've answered a bit as well. Would you like to add more? Are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. That's a great question. Actually, I think that there are if there are some American Chinese food in China, I nearly heard that they are very popular. Actually, because I think the Chinese and the Americans, they have different flavor. Actually, I think Chinese like some salty food, but Americans like some sour or sweet food. So I think the American Chinese food, if they back to China, they may not be popular. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Do you have more questions for her? People? Any more questions?
I have a question for her. Why do you think that the Chinese food in America is so unauthentic? Is there a reason they just don't make the authentic food?
That's a great question. Actually, I think some American Chinese food is not authentic because the way they made them and the ingredients are not very similar to the authentic Chinese food. And I think why the American Chinese restaurants don't provide the authentic Chinese food, because some American customers they can't accept the authentic Chinese food because maybe the flavor of it is a bit spicy or a bit strange. So some American Chinese restaurants must change the authentic Chinese food to the American Chinese food to adapt to the American customers. And that's all. Thank you.
Hi, can I ask a question as well?
So sorry.
I understand. Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah. Go for it. Yeah.
All right. I wanted to ask, could the authenticity of the food could it have been changed over the period of time? So if my grandparents were Chinese, could it have changed over time due to the generations getting diluted with other cultures as well?
Actually, I think maybe it is possible. Because if you stay in an environment for a long time, and you will be familiar with it, and you will be you will get sorry, let me think about it. You will assimilate it by the environment. I think.
Thank you.
That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any more questions? I guess not. Okay. So the third presenter, Małgosia, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Have you read the questions?
Yes.
All right. Would you care to?
Yes. So I think I mentioned that the first word that was borrowed was singiel, which at first was used both for both genders, but since Polish language is gender dependent, it divided into singiel, being the guy who is single and married and happy with it, and singielka, the female version. So that's the first part of the question, and I hope not. I hope that the definition wouldn't change so much with the male perspective. If the questionnaire was given to men, it is possible that it would be less positive, but I think it's more of a cultural change, not just for women, and it might also be an issue of age, because my participants were under 40 in general, so with most of them being under 25, and I think it's the global world that was not so global back in the day might also influence the viewpoint. So maybe for the younger men, it would be the same, neutral towards positive definition. And
Małgosia, if I may, is there any reason why you chose people under 40 or only women?
Actually, I picked a Facebook group that was mostly consisted of women. So that were the people who participated in the study. And also because of the texts of culture that I analyzed were only written by female, I've decided to just pick the perspective of women. It wasn't, I don't know, feministic in any sense. And I think that it could be done for the male perspective as well. And to answer your question that you asked, I didn't ask if the women were Singielkas themselves, if they were single, though since the participants were mostly younger and a lot of them were between 20 and 25, I would assume they were not married. And what I found interesting that with the groups, depending on the group, changed a bit the age of Singielka. So, for example, the women generally picked their own age group and someone up to 5 years or 10 years older than them. But also there were people who decided that it doesn't matter the age. So that's to answer Chris' question. The attitude was dependent on the age of the participant, but for the older participants in this questionnaire, they connected the Singielka also with somebody who is older. But in my opinion, from the general data that I collected, Singielka is the equivalent of a married woman, like the counterpart of a married woman. So, for example, women who were over the age, you would assume someone would get married. So let's say over, I don't know, 50 or 60, they were not picked as Singielkas. And it was the same with girls under 18, where they are not yet women in a sense. So I think that answers the question.
Okay, there's a new question for you. I'm not sure if you can. If you already read it. Robin's question.
No, I haven't, but I will check it out.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Okay, any more questions for Małgosia or any of the other participants or presenters? Have you got any more questions, anyone? Because not everyone is quiet, I can see. Okay, all microphones muted, so I guess no one is asking. No questions. No questions in the chat. So I guess that will be it. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. The presenters, hi Chris, I can see you finally. And so thank you very much, everyone, for participating and for the discussion. And that will be it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dziękuję.
Okay, thank you everybody for taking part. I just want to mention that we have the last session that will be starting in about 2 hours at 10 a.m. ECU time, and it will be on global cultural awareness. So I think it will be a nice summary for the week of activities that we've had, and I hope to see many of you online to listen to the presentations about how we can develop our cultural awareness and how these type of activities that we are involved in, promote understanding between different cultures. I do think that we've had some very interesting presentations today, 3 different perspectives, and I think it's been a very good discussion that we've had. So thank you again for the 3 presenters. Thank you for all the audience for taking part, and hope to see you for the last session in a very short period of time. So goodbye to everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are.
Okay, bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.